I find that completely implausible. If somebody said to me, hey, what's more likely, if I didn't know any better, and somebody said to me, what's more likely to produce consciousness, a random search or some very smart scientists who, by the way, can also use random search if they want to, but they can also have, a rational design, I would say, well, of course, the second one.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you an earlier interview with Dr. Micheal Levin that I found to be really mind-bending. In it, I wanted to explore the cellular basis of consciousness, and we delved into that a little bit. However, as is often the case when the expertise of the person is focused on another problem, we get to learn quite a bit, actually, about the real questions that we should be asking. And sometimes we find that we're asking the wrong questions, and a big part of science is figuring out what those right questions are. So I wanted to explore the cellular basis of consciousness. However, the part that I found really interesting was his discussion of how cells, these tiny minuscule cells, were made up of billions and billions of these tiny microscopic cells, how they work together and communicate to build macroscopic structures like bodies and hands and eyes, and they maintain their shape. They maintain your body shape over long periods of time. I find it inspiring to realize from this discussion how much we have yet to learn. Are individual cells conscious? How can this be? They don't have brains. They don't have neurons. Neurons are single-celled. They're not even creatures. They're single-celled subunits of a brain. How can a single cell be conscious if consciousness arises in a neural network in our brains? Maybe it doesn't. And if these cells are conscious, how does this cellular consciousness come together to form a unified experience in a single organism? Are human cells like ants in a colony? Are we a hive mind? I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and please feel free to explore on your own more as you learn about this interesting topic. Please hit like on your podcast app if you enjoy what you're hearing, and give me your feedback on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Micheal Levin received dual BS degrees in computer science and biology, followed by a Ph.D. from Harvard. After postdoc training at Harvard Medical School, he started his independent lab at Forsyth Institute, focusing on the biophysics of cell-cell communication during embryogenesis, regeneration, and cancer. In 2009, he moved his group to Tufts, where they use biophysical and computational approaches to study decision-making and basal cognition in cells, tissues, and synthetic living machines. Levin holds the Vannevar Bush Chair and directs the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts, working to crack the morphogenetic code for applications in regenerative medicine, bioengineering, and artificial intelligence. Recent work includes the modulation of native bioelectric circuits to control embryogenesis, regeneration, and cancer, and the creation of novel synthetic living proto-organisms. Dr. Levin, welcome to The Rational View.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on our show. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be an expert in these fields and a dual Bachelor of Science degree? That's very interesting.
Sure. And I should say, I don't know how much any of us are actually experts in what I think is really an emerging field. I think we're just scratching at the beginnings of it right now. But my own background is I was from the earliest times that I can remember, I was interested in both life and technology, and interested in the difference between, sort of obvious machines that we use versus the living organism, insects that I used to, watch as a kid, and so on. And originally, I was going to do computer science. I was interested in computer science, artificial intelligence. That seemed like a good entryway into understanding mind and how it can be embodied in the physical world, is to try to create some during with computational tools. And then while I was in, and so I did some programming for work and things like that. And then I went to undergrad. I got a degree in computer science, and right around that time, I kind of realized that I think biology is going to be a really critical part of this, and in particular, developmental biology, and we can talk about why that is. And so I got two degrees, one in computer science and one in biology. And after that, sort of dropped all the software stuff I was doing, and basically just went to graduate school in genetics.
I see. Yeah, no, that sounds very interesting, and I've had a lot of parallel interest in artificial intelligence and minds, and that's why I'm doing this particular series of podcasts. So, why is it that you felt biology is key to this problem?
Well, the most perhaps one of the most wondrous aspects of science is that we all make the journey from just what people often refer to as just physics, a collection of quiescent chemical networks sitting in an unfertilized egg, and then eventually that becomes at least in the case of humans, it becomes an advanced cognitive system able to have second-order metacognition and make claims about being not just a machine and all kinds of fun things like that. But that journey, right, from being a quiescent oocyte, which many people would look at and say, okay, this thing is not cognitive in any way, it's just chemistry, but somehow it becomes whatever it is that we are. And that's a very slow and gradual process. There's no magical line at which some sort of lightning bolt bestows true cognition on us. It's a slow transformation. And that to me is, if anything is magic, that's magic there, because basically what you see is physics becoming mind. That happens every single time some sort of egg becomes an organism or human or not human. And so I think developmental biology in many ways holds the answer to some of the deepest problems of science and philosophy, personal identity, all of those things.
Yeah, it's a complex field, and I think a lot of us are hesitant to enter biology because it's so complex, and physics has a lot of simplicity to it, in a controllable experiment where your subjects don't adapt and evolve and change. And congrats to you for taking that leap and taking on the challenge of biology in this. Your research program is very broad. Your bio says you're researching decision making and basal cognition in cells. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, our lab looks like it does a million different things, but actually everything that we do is all connected to one fundamental question, and that question plays out in aspects of machine learning and in regenerative biology and in cancer and in evolution and behavior science and so on. It's the same question. The question is, how do complex emergent minds arise out of combinations of smaller modules that are also competent in some way? So we are all, all intelligences are collective intelligences, right? We're all made of parts. Every intelligence is made of parts, and some of those parts are themselves very competent, and so on and down the line. And so the question is, how does the scale-up work? How is it? What kind of relationship between cells gives you a big, large mind? What kind of chemical events give you cells, and so on? So at every level, you can ask this question about scaling up. I think it's really interesting. And so in our group, we tackle that in a variety of contexts, but the one where we've made the most progress is at the level of cells. So we study how individual cells become problem-solving individuals and have some degree of basal cognition, in various spaces. This is not just the traditional three-dimensional space of behavior, which is what most people study for intelligence, but also other spaces. So physiological state space, transcriptional space of gene expression, and in particular morphospace, the space of all geometric configurations of the body. So cells, figuring out how cells navigate all those spaces is kind of an invariant that ties all of our work together.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've spoken with Dr. Arthur Reber, who's a psychologist or philosopher who looks at who's trying to answer the question as well as where does consciousness arise, and his position is that individual cells are sentient or aware to some extent. And is that what do you mean by basal cognition? Is that the same sort of thing, that there's some basic awareness in a cell that it has a first person experience?
Well, these are all related terms, but I think we have to be very careful if we're going to make progress here. So I generally do not talk about consciousness almost at all. I mean, we can get into it if you want. I have a few things to say, but the vast majority of my work specifically avoids that issue. So basal cognition, and as I define sentience, which is the ability of being aware of events that are ongoing and reacting adaptively, that doesn't necessarily say anything about consciousness, right? So that's something that, to a small degree, could be attributed to a thermostat, a Roomba navigating your room. There are many things that have the ability to sense their environment and behave appropriately. The existence of a first-person perspective is a whole other sort of kettle of fish that we can get into. But basal cognition, the field of basal cognition is by itself very third-person science. It has to do with behavior, it has to do with prediction of behavior, it has to do with computation, and it has to do with us as third-person observers and scientists trying to come up with models for the kinds of things we see these creatures doing, and of course the creatures themselves having some sort of model of what they themselves are doing, right? So to some level of sophistication, there may be self-modeling going on and so on. None of this specifically involves having to make any claim about consciousness at all. I think you can make great progress in basal cognition and do very well and learn lots of new things without ever touching the issue of consciousness. So I just want to make that clear. When I'm making claims about cognition, it isn't specifically about consciousness at all.
I see. Okay, that's good, because definitions seem to be few and far between in this field. So it's very important. I think a lot of the misunderstanding is that people have different definitions when they're talking about the same words.
That's exactly right. People, I've found that not only do people have different definitions, people have very different rules as far as what counts as evidence for and against certain claims. And so you will often find two people arguing where one person is trying to argue about specific experimental outcomes, and someone else and the other person is actually arguing about very large-scale kinds of interpretation and philosophical approaches to things. So to me, all agency claims are engineering claims. When you tell me, and we can dive into this, but when you tell me that something has a certain level of agency, what you're actually telling me is how I go about interfacing with that system, whether it be in an engineering context or in a relationship or whatever it is. There are claims about how we are going to be able to interact, either in a very advanced way or a very simple way, but there are certain ways. So that's a very empirical approach in which all of those claims are eminently testable. So if we make a specific claim about the agency of some system, I interpret that as an engineering protocol. I will then attempt to interface with that system using that protocol, and we will find out that we were either right or wrong. So if you tell me that a certain system has the cognition to have a particular kind of goal-seeking behavior with memory and whatever, well, we can try it and find out if that actually helps us understand the system. Other people, so that's where I'm coming from. I take all of these things as not philosophical conjectures. These are all empirical claims that are to be tested. Other people may have fundamental commitments to things, and the question then becomes, and it's very hard to argue when these things don't match up. It's hard for two people to have a productive conversation because other people might have specific commitments to certain outcomes, and any theory that lands outside of those outcomes is automatically wrong because the commitments take precedence. So it's a question of, some people will say, I don't want to hear any theory in which thermostats have goals, because I do not believe that thermostats can have goals. Period. So if you tell me so any theory that has that as a consequence, I'm calling it automatically wrong, right? So the question is, whereas to me that's very much an empirical question. We're going to find out if that's a useful way to think about things, right? And I think that was settled by cybernetics, 60 years ago, but that's a different story. So the point is, yeah, people often argue, and I think they need to set right up front what's going to be the deciding process for these kinds of things.
And that's very very rational, coming from the rational view. I like the empirical focus and the very science-based approach to this, and the philosophical analysis of this can come later once you have the empirical basis settled. And I think that's how we make progress in science, is testing our ideas. And you start from the high level theory and you go down and say, okay, here's an experiment that will differentiate, and you make the experiment and you come out with a result that helps to refine the higher level theory. So just to be very clear, you say that cells make decisions. I mean, but you're not talking about awareness or conscious thought. It's responding to stimuli and goal-seeking behavior when you're talking about decision making. Or can you maybe clarify a little bit so that we're not confused?
Sure. And to be very clear, I don't believe in binary categories about almost anything. And so when we talk about, does it really make decisions, I would replace that with the question of how much is some event profitably viewed as a decision versus as something else. And so I see everything as a spectrum or a continuum, and then we can sort of discuss where certain events are on this continuum. I think that it's important to remember that the vast majority of decisions that you make and I make have no awareness to them. So the vast bulk of our behavior and cognitive performance is not the kind of thing where I sit down and I say, all right, now I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to go to grad school, or I'm going to quit and do something else. Those kind of conscious decisions are the icing on top of the cake that is our cognition. So let's just sort of know that right from the front, that even in humans, conscious decision making is a huge minority of what we do. Now, having said that, yes, when I say decision, I do not mean that sort of very rare in the biosphere event where it's second order, meaning I know that I'm about to make a decision. I have metacognition that is aware of the process of decision making. I'm not talking about that at all. A simple decision, the degree to which something is a decision, I would propose. Here's a definition I will propose, and you can sort of react to see if you like it. My definition is this: some event. One more piece of background that we need to get into this. Sometimes people will frame it like this. They will say, "Was that a decision, or was that just a physical process?" I mean, I can track the what just happened, and it looks just like a piece of physics to me. So the thing is that if you zoom in far enough, of course, everything is a physical process. There's nothing you're going to have, whether in humans or anywhere else, where if you dig in far enough, you're not going to see just physics. So I think this is very much not is decision something magical that doesn't have physics underneath? Of course it does. The question is, what else does the concept of decision making give you beyond, well, I'm going to track the electrons and see where this thing sort of ends up? And so here's my take on the decision making. The degree to which something is a decision rests on to what extent is the best model for what just happened, it needing to involve things at a bigger radius in space and time. So if I can explain everything that you just did very efficiently with local causes, that's not much of a decision. That's much more closer to the physical, sort of set of pushes. So if you're a billiard ball and I come over and I sort of push you in a particular way and you go, and then somebody looks at that and says, okay, how do we explain what just happened? You don't need to know much of anything that happened before the push in order to say what happened. That's not much of a decision. On the other hand, if you're going to have a complex organism that just did something, and the best explanation, and then we can get into what's a good explanation. The best explanation for what happened talks about, well, 2 weeks ago it had this experience, and that made a huge impact in what it just did. And by the way, it's also taking in evidence from something that's happening in the next room, or maybe it's receiving signals from, once you have a process that starts integrating across a larger light cone, so to speak, right? To borrow some physics terminology, the more stuff needs to go in to explain how that process happened, the more likely it is that it's a decision and not just a piece of physics. That's kind of a first order. That's a first order explanation. So you can start to look at so here are some kind of in between cases. So you have a slime mold, and the slime mold is sitting in the middle of a dish, and what you've done is, and we've recently published exactly this work. You place one glass disc off about 10 centimeters to the left. You place another 3 glass discs off to the right, and the physarum, the slime mold, is sitting in the middle. The whole thing is one cell. Physarum is just one cell, so it's sitting in the middle. You've got 1 glass disc to the left, 3 glass discs to the right. These discs are completely inert. They have no food or anything else on them. They're just glass. And what you will find out is that for the first few hours, that slime mold sort of grows in an equal radius. It just sort of expands right in the middle. It's not going in any direction. It just kind of grows. But after a few hours, it goes boom, and it goes right to where the 3 discs are. So what's happening is that during the time that it's sort of sitting there, the first few hours, it's tugging on the substrate, because it sits on this gelatin, and it tugs on this agar. And by feeling the vibrations that come back, it's almost like a kind of sonar. It can basically sense where the mass distributions are in its environment, because the strain angle of these weights pushing down on the agar, and the sensitivity is this thing is incredible. These glass discs are milligrams in weight. I mean, the sensitivity of this thing is insane. But what it does after a while is it reliably goes towards the 3. Okay, it prefers going towards the heavier masses. I don't know why. I assume because in the wild, if there's a big mass nearby, something must have keeled over and died and could go over and eat it. I'm guessing that's what it is. So then you can ask yourself, right? So you can ask yourself, is that? So there are two. There are 2 levels, right? One level is just the physical facts. Do we agree that that's what the physarum is doing, and anybody can do this experiment and see that yes, in fact, that's what happens. And then the next thing is, okay, is that a decision? So now you can do the same thing with it that you might do with a human or a bowling ball or anything else. You zoom in, and at the micro level of detail, all you're ever going to see is physics. And so the way it works, of course, inevitably, what else could possibly be under there? Of course, it's going to be physics. But psychologically, there's a phenomenon which really kind of upsets me every time I encounter it, and I see it a lot. Here's what happens: if I give a talk and I talk about this physarum doing this, people are amazed. They said, "My God, this thing is, this thing is able to make a choice to go here or there, and basal cognition." Everybody's very excited. Then we show the physical mechanism. We show how it happens. Well, here's how it happens. There's a certain cytoskeletal set of events, and they set vibrations in the thing, and the strain comes back through the agar, and then there's a stretch activated calcium channel, and that gets opened up in a particular way. The calcium pulses kind of trigger more growth on one side. So once people see the explanation, then they go, "Oh, well, I see how that works. That's just physics. That's not, that's not so cool." And that kind of drives me crazy all the time, because I feel like, well, first of all, having explanations to things should make you happier, not disappointed. That's first, and second, it doesn't change the nature of what happened. Of course, there's some physical story to be told. Of course, there is, and in fact, it's super cool. I mean, there's more. There's memory involved here, because during those first few hours that it's doing this, it isn't actually going anywhere. It's sitting completely still until it forms some sort of biophysical representation of which way the mass is going, and then it takes off, right? So there's all kinds of cool events, but of course there's physics underneath. So now you can start to ask, was that a decision? And if you focus on the physics, you might be tempted to say, well, now that I know how it works, I don't think that's a decision. I think that's the only way it could have happened, right? If you're some sort of micro-determinist. But that, of course, is a story you could tell about everything. In that case, there are no decisions. So if we're more on the biological side of things, where decisions are a useful concept, then it's very clear that this is a kind of decision. Does it take into account what happened 2 weeks ago? No, it does not. Does it take into account what's going to happen in the future? Apparently not. But it does take into account what's happening over a 12, let's say a 10 or 12 hour time period on the scale of, let's say, 10 or 15 centimeters. That's a degree of decision making that, frankly, of the size you would expect of a slime mold. Right? It is, it isn't the kind of thing you would expect from a human, nor what you would expect from a bowling ball. It's basically what you would expect from a slime mold. So that's my take on decision making. It occurs to some level of scale, and we do experiments, and then we see how much decision making there is.
Yeah, it seems it's the black and white response is hard to defend when you start getting to that level of detail. Everything should be on a spectrum in that case. And yeah, it depends on which direction you come at it, how you see it. That's a good observation. So moving on, so many interesting questions that I'd like to explore with you.
Sure.
How do collections of individual cells become a unified self? This is something that's come up previously in people claiming that, the basis of awareness is individual cells, but they had no idea about, they had said something about synchronization, but it's a kind of hand wavy, right? You're right in the dirt here. What's going on?
Okay, so I'll tell you a story that I think is reasonable with two caveats. One is that, of course, this is we don't know yet that this is going to be the best story. So this is just something that I've come up with, and we'll see over the years. We'll see how it fares. And B, this is not a story about consciousness. Okay, this is a story about cognition. So the story I'm going to tell is this: imagine that you're a single cell, and what you are able to you like any good successful agent, you have some ability to pursue goals. What that looks like is you're a simple homeostatic agent. Basically, let's say the only thing you care about is pH, local pH, right? So if the pH is too low, you add some acid. If the pH is too high, you add some base and that kind of thing, right? You're basically, you've got a little loop, and the way the little loops work is you take a measurement and you and then you compare it to some sort of memory of a set point that you have, a very simple memory, and then you either you act on it and so on, right? So you're that level. So now let's ask, okay, for that individual, we can draw what I've called the cognitive light cone, which is basically the spatiotemporal scale of things that it cares about. And it's quite small. It's local. It's maybe it has a little bit of prediction going forward. Maybe it's got some memory going backwards, but it's pretty small. Okay. So now imagine that, and so now I'm going to tell you the story of scaling. So now imagine that there are two cells, and these two cells they can communicate. The standard way of communication is that one sends a signal. It's some diffusible molecule. It sort of floats along, and the other cell catches it. That level of communication makes it really simple for both cells to know that signal is coming from the outside. Because it comes from the outside, you catch it on your membrane, and then you have choices. You can either respond to it, you can ignore it, you can believe it, you can disbelieve it, whatever. It's very clear that these are two different individuals talking to each other. Now, evolution figured out a really cool trick to do something different. That cool trick, and I'm sure there are others like it, but this is the one that we know. It involves something called gap junctions. Gap junctions are these little basically think of a submarine hatch in the surface of the cell. It's a little circular thing that can be opened or closed, and two of these submarine hatches from adjacent cells can dock together. And most of the cells in your body have these, and then they can be opened or closed. So now the cool thing about that is that if they're open, material, small signaling molecules can go from one directly into the internal milieu of the other. So now, a couple of interesting things happen when you have that kind of connection. The first thing that happens is information inside the cell doesn't have any metadata on it in terms of where it came from. So imagine there are two cells, A and B, and they're connected like this with this gap junction. Cell A gets poked by something, it gets injured or something like that. There's a calcium flux, and this calcium flux and then some second messenger stuff serves as a memory, even if it's short-lived, but it serves as a memory of an event that happened. It's an engram, basically. But now this cell is connected to the neighboring cell. That calcium, or whatever the physiological state is, propagates to the neighboring cell. As soon as it propagates to the neighboring cell, that neighboring cell has this engram of damage which, as far as the second cell is concerned, it's a false memory because the second cell didn't have any damage. However, it can't tell because its calcium signal is exactly the same as the one it just got. They're basically, right? It can't tell that this is a false memory in some sense. So what happens is by sharing this kind of information directly into the internal milieu, what happens is you start to erode the boundary between the two individuals. If your memories are partially my memories, it becomes very difficult for us to keep interpersonal identity. It becomes very difficult for us to keep boundaries because we're sharing memories. So several things happen when you do this. The first thing that happens is we share memories and we're now kind of in a mind meld, so to speak. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is because we're physiologically connected, it becomes impossible for us not to cooperate in the game theory sense of the word, because anything nasty that I do to you comes back immediately. We're connected physiologically, so there's no way, even if I could muster the computational effort that it would take to say that, to distinguish us, right? We're sharing most of our memories, so that's not an easy trick. But even if I could somehow muster the computation that I'm going to do this, and I know it's no good for you, but I'm going to do it because I'm selfish. That doesn't work because we're connected. Whatever happens to you happens to me immediately, right? So these are the things that happen. So we start. So as far as the second cell is concerned, that's a false memory. As far as the new group individual is concerned, it's absolutely a veridical memory because that individual did in fact experience this. The same way that a rat, think about what happens when you train a rat to receive a reward for pressing some sort of button. Only a few cells of the rat interact with a button, the cells on the paws, and only a few cells in the lower intestine and the stomach lining of the rat get the reward. But so as a collective individual, every cell doesn't have to be part of the experience in order for you to have an experience and have a linkage between two experiences and all that kind of stuff. So those are some things that happen. The other thing that so you get cooperation, you get a mind meld. The other thing that happens is, let's go back to this idea that each cell is a homeostatic agent. When you are connected by gap junctions and you are taking a measurement of, let's say, local pH, when you are connected, you're no longer taking a local measurement. You're taking a measurement across the whole thing. And if you're not 2 cells, you're 100 cells, you're taking a huge measurement because everybody's kind of connected and everybody contributes to the value of that measurement, because every cell can't really keep its own independent idea of what's going on. So now it starts to take measurements as a collective. Then you have to compare it to the memory. Well, what memory? You're all sharing a memory. And by the way, it's now much bigger, so you have more computational capacity. So maybe whereas before all you could remember was a single scalar, like what's the right pH level, maybe now you can remember things like, hey, a proper limb has to have 5 fingers. Right? You can remember bigger things because you have bigger computational capacity. You're a much bigger network now than you were before. And thirdly, when you act, instead of very local, tiny little actions in that cognitive light cone of a single cell, when the whole collective acts, you can do things like, well, let's all bend in a cell sheet and have some kind of biomechanical topology change, and we'll make a cylinder or something, because you're no longer acting as a single cell. You are all connected. You can now take larger actions. So look at what's happened. Everything has scaled up, right? The types of things you can measure has scaled up. The types of memories you can have has scaled up. The cooperativity and the ability to work towards these huge goals has scaled up. And the ability to take action towards those goals has, and in fact, you've now switched spaces, whereas before you were only acting in physiological space. Now, when you're a sheet of cells doing large-scale tissue-level things, you are now acting in morphospace, right? The space of all possible geometric deformations of that sheet. So you've now been able to access a new problem space by virtue of scaling up. There's one final thing that happens, and that is the scaling of stress. If let's define stress like this. We're going to say that stress is the physical consequences of the delta, the error between the set point and the homeostasis and whatever's going on now. So if you would like things to be like this, but they're actually like this, that delta, whatever that difference is, that's the stress level. And there's one more important component. So a single cell will, like any homeostat, will work towards reducing that stress level. That's what drives all of life, I guess, to try to keep in homeostasis is by reducing that stress. One of the things that cells that are connected can do is they can export those stress molecules to their neighbors. So let's say that your stress, now how do you keep stress? Well, there are cytoplasmic molecules that are ways we can measure stress response, right? Like heat shock proteins and things like that. And to the extent that you can propagate those stress molecules to your neighbors, something very interesting happens. Imagine that I'm a cell. I'm sitting in this whole group of cells. I'm really unhappy because I know that I need to be up there. I need to be closer to the head or the eye, whatever's up there. But these cells are pretty happy. They're not letting me through. Okay, and this is just an example in 3D space. This actually works in any kind of space. I'm all stressed out because my error is really high. But what I can do is I can start leaking that stress state into my neighbors. Now they're getting stressed out, not because there's anything wrong with them, but they can't tell the difference. They're stressed out because they're getting a bunch of my stress molecules. What stress does is it raises plasticity. Everybody's a little more willing to make changes, right? If you're super happy, you're making no changes because everything's great. As soon as you're all stressed out, you're starting to, you're getting a little more plastic. And this has been studied in cancer and other examples where stress raises plasticity. When you're more plastic and you're willing to sort of move around, and it's almost like raising a temperature in a chunk of metal. All the domains are a little more ready to kind of shift. And then now there's room for me to get where I'm going, and then the stress of the whole thing can come back down. Look at what that does. Two things. First, it raises cooperativity like crazy because my problem becomes your problem. Not because we're altruistic, not because you care about what my issues are, but because until my stress lowers, your stress can't lower. So it's an automatic process. It doesn't require, you don't have to evolve this really. It's a free lunch kind of thing. That just means as soon as I'm able to propagate my error and not just keep it to myself, we start to share problems. It means that there's a collective goal now to reduce stress because of whatever my problem happens to be, right? You don't have to care about my problem. You can't help it because I'm stressing you out. And so, right? And the other thing that happens is because of that, much like the previous story, you start to the state of affairs that can stress you out can now be huge because the stress is shared. Then it's not just individual cell states that can stress you. For example, the difference between a gradient across the whole thing that might stress the collective now, whereas before no individual cell cares about what the gradient is up there. They do once they start sharing the stress. So now I'll end this whole thing just by saying that. If I encounter a new creature, and that could be anything from a bacteria to a super intelligent alien, if you tell me what kinds of things stress you out, I immediately know your level of intellectual sophistication. If you tell me that the biggest thing that you can be stressed about is the local level of sucrose, you're kind of a bacterium. If you tell me that you're stressed about things that happen in a 50-foot radius around a particular perimeter, you might be a dog or you might be something similar. If you tell me that you're stressed about the financial markets in the next 10 years, I'm going to say you're probably a human, right? Nothing below is ever going to be stressed by that level of effect. And if you tell me that you are stressed out in a linear range by the state of suffering of all life forms on the planet, I'm going to say you're not a human. Humans can't do that in a linear range. You are some sort of alien, some sort of Buddha. I don't know what you are, but you're beyond human. So right. So to me, the level of the biggest thing that could possibly stress you out is a great indicator of your cognitive level.
Interesting. Again, this is all on the spectrums, as you say, of judgment. This exactly. Isn't like a hard line between one or the other. You're looking at spheres of influence and spheres of stress.
Yes. I don't know how to add. Very good. Yeah, I don't know how to put hard lines on any of this because if we take developmental biology and evolution seriously, we never see any real. We never see any hard lines. All you see is a slow change. So you were an egg, a fertilized egg that at best cared about local physiological conditions and some metabolic conditions. And eventually you might become somebody that's depressed by the thought of the sun burning out in 4 billion years. That's a massive, right? That's a massive scale up of your cognitive, light cone. But it happens slow. There was never a major transition really there. So I don't know how to put lines on any of this. It's a gradual process.
And so from that viewpoint, you would probably say that consciousness is also on a spectrum with different animals and humans and things like that. There's no sharp dividing line between people, say, and other animals. What would you say to that statement?
I don't. This is going to sound silly, but I mean it. I mean it seriously, 100%. I don't know what you mean by people in the following sense. Whatever, and people say this to me all the time. Well, the human brain does this, and I say, well, let's unpack that. The human brain. And they say, the child. When I ask for, when does such and such happen, they say, oh, it's when the child, whatever. I say, okay, a human brain or a human child. Now, yes, definitely cognitive, deserving of rights, all this kind of stuff. How about 100,000 years ago? Oh, yeah, definitely still. How about 300,000 years ago? How about 400,000 years ago? I mean, if we take evolution seriously, you can just start walking backwards. And is anybody really telling us that they're going to say, this set of hominids right here, I'm watching them, they are not really conscious, they are not really whatever. Boom, now they've had a child, and that offspring, that creature they've had, now it's got whatever. That seems crazy to me, right? That's a very strong claim that somebody would have to defend. I have no idea how you defend that claim. All I see is smoothly working backwards, developmental event by developmental event, all the way back down to bacteria. So that's how when I talk to people about this, I don't start with paramecium and ask them to come with me to the idea that the paramecium has some level of first-person perspective. Nobody likes that. I do it the other way around. I say, start with whatever you are, and let's just work backwards, and you can tell me when you think it winks out. And no one has a convincing story of when it winks out. That's the problem. You sort of start backwards. Now, some people are, intellectually, I suppose the most honest thing is some people will say, oh, I don't have it either. And then we're kind of done at that point. At that point, we're kind of done. I don't have anything to say after that. But as long as you believe that you have whatever it is, true cognition, true, moral standing, but you pick whatever it is. I'm just going to slowly dial it backwards until we end up an amoeba, and you can try to tell me where it disappears.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very, very strong argument for not distinguishing. I do like that approach.
Yeah, not only that, and Darwin saw that very clearly. I mean, people sort of forgot. He talked a lot about basal cognition and intelligence in plants and things like that. He understood the consequences very well of his gradualist theory. There's another piece. There's another reason why I'm not sure what anybody means when they say the human, the person or the human. We now have the ability, and we've had this for quite some time, and it's going to grow in magnitude massively, to modify your standard kind of inborn hardware with different kinds of add-ons. So the simple ones are glasses and crutches and things like that. Those are wheelchairs. Those are simple. The new ones are novel prosthetics that let you do things that standard humans can't do, novel sensory inputs that might let you see and feel things. You might decide that you need some sort of implant that lets you see in the infrared and ultraviolet range, or you might decide that, forget that. What I want immediate input from the stock markets and from the solar weather. That's what I want my sensory milieu to be. Why not? You could do that. And so then we're going to find out that, yeah, you could also have an implant that helps control your neurotransmitter levels way better than standard humans do. And by the way, you can also connect up to some kind of additional processing, whether that be digital or whether that be an implant. Let's put a third hemisphere up in there. We know that it sounds kind of crazy, but we know that if somebody is blind, real estate in the brain gets taken over by other senses, right? So we know that new real estate that doesn't seem to be doing anything gets taken over by various functions. Well, who's to say we can't put additional real estate in and let that get taken over? So all of this kind of stuff, again, it's all very, very gradual. So if you tell me that person X is still a human because they're only 2% cyborg, they have some kind of little implant that lets them run their wheelchair or a vacuum cleaner or something, I will then ask you about every possibility from 2% all the way up until you become basically a cyborg with a few human cells rattling around. And then again, you can tell me where you think things wink out. I didn't make up any of this stuff. This is science fiction, has been dealing with this for probably a couple of 100 years now, but nobody really took it seriously. And it's high time, because this is all reality. This is all happening now. It's all, we're going to see all this in our lifetime. We are already seeing some of it. So again, it's going to be very, very weird. Look, I think, and this is also an unpopular view, but I think that this binary kind of categorization, there are humans and then there are other things, and that's left over from the Garden of Eden view, where there was Adam and he got to name all the animals and nothing ever changed, and we knew what he was and we knew what all the animals were, and like that's it. That's gone. That's gone for so many reasons. It was gone with Darwin, it's gone with developmental biology, it's gone with bioengineering. That's just gone.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to touch on another area of your research, in memory. I mean, one of the key aspects of awareness is our access to our memories. And you've done a lot of work in the cellular basis of memory, I think. Do we understand how our memories are stored? You've referenced calcium from individual cell responses is a type of memory. Do we have any idea how our memories are stored?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, we have some idea of the things that are important for the process. So there are many people who are doing great work in memory, and they know some of the things that are important for that process. Do I think that we understand the medium and the encoding? No, I don't think we do. And that's the story that has held together for some decades of memory being specific changes in synaptic function. That story was already cracking in the 70s, and it's really cracking now. And there's some great people. I can mention later on some names that you might want to also talk to. There's some great people working on this, but that story is really cracking. And there are numerous reasons for it. Here are some. If we want to talk about memory, here's some facts we should, just facts we should think about, and they can kind of tell us what we should be looking for. Number one, if you the most basic issue is this: most of us in our old age have some memories of things we did when we were kids. So therefore, there is some kind of structure in your brain that is supposed to remain invariant for 80 years. I don't know what that would be. I mean, everything we know about is incredibly plastic at the micro scale. I don't know of any kind of structure that plausibly remains invariant for that long. If you train a caterpillar on a certain task, that caterpillar will become a butterfly or a moth. During that process, it basically takes apart its brain. Most of the neurons die. Most of the connections are broken. It rebuilds a completely new brain. The caterpillar still remembers, the butterfly still remembers things that the caterpillar learned. So memory is, in some sense, robust to massive changes of brain structure. By the way, if you're interested in questions of first-person perspective and kind of consciousness and philosophy of mind, think about what it's like. Never mind what it's like to be a caterpillar. What is it like to be a caterpillar slowly changing into a butterfly? I mean, how's that? You have right. You have an adult. You have a mature organism that has whatever it has in terms of its cognition. And then that brain starts slowly changing into a brain that has completely different preferences. It doesn't want to crawl anymore. It likes to fly, and now it likes nectar instead of leaves. But it still has some of the same individuality because it remembers the original information. But I mean, that kind of change makes,
Wow.
The changes of puberty in humans or whatever makes that like child's play, right? Because we all go through changes. But I mean, this is some serious change, right? Here's another example. Sorry.
The entire body plan just gets mixed around in a soup.
The body plan is that's right. The body plan is mixed around. You're going to end up in a completely different creature. You're going to be reborn, literally reborn as.
But memories are conserved.
At least some. I don't know that all of them are, but some of them certainly are. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's another example which is perhaps even more remarkable. And this Jim McConnell found this in the 60s, and he sort of caught a lot of crap for it, but we reproduced it with modern methods in 2013, and he was absolutely right. Yeah, they have these flatworms called planaria, and the cool thing, one of many cool things about these planaria is that they regenerate every part of the body. So you can cut off their heads, they grow, the tail will grow a new head. But they have a true centralized brain. They're bilaterians like us. So they have a true centralized brain. So you can train these planaria. You cut off their heads. You take the tail. The tail will sit there for a week doing absolutely nothing. Then it regrows a brand new brain. Then you find out that the new animal still has the memories. So now what that tells you is,
Wow.
first of all, memory is not entirely in the brain. That's A. B, it gets imprinted onto the new brain, but because the brain controls behavior. So in order for you to see that it remembers, the brain had to have learned whatever it was. So that is imprinted by it's imprinted on the brain by other cells. And by the way, you could have cut that worm into multiple pieces. They will all have the memory. So this is like the old malfunctioning transporter experiment in Philosophy 101, right? When there's more than one copy of you, well, you can actually do that. Planaria can actually do that. And then
Wow.
of course, this is not just a weird curiosity. Humans undergoing in the next decade, we're going to have adult humans with 5-6 decades of memory and personality have stem cells put into their brains to repair degenerative brain disease. So what happens when portions of your brain become replaced by these naive cells? Based on this, I have a feeling that it'll be just fine, but it might not be. So this issue of how do memories move around in tissue. So I think all in all. So I think we don't know. There are some people that have done some Glantzman has done some amazing work recently, and other people have on transplanting memories. So you can transplant both tissues and chemicals from brain to brain, and there's some evidence for transplanting memories. I
Wow. In people?
will. No, nobody's done this in people that I know of. No, this has
Okay.
been in animal models. Yeah, they've done rats. I mean, there was a lot of work in the 70s on doing this in rats. I will say, I'll just go on the record here with a crazy, sort of idea. I think that the neural networks in our brain and in our central nervous system are not for storing information. I think they're for interpreting information. So I think there is some kind of medium. I don't know what it is. It might be cytoskeletal structures. It might be biochemical structures. I don't know what it is. But I think the neural networks are all about reading that substrate. They're the readout machinery. They're the electronics that read the hard drive, so to speak. And the hard drive is probably in some way it's very stable. It's probably biophysical in some sense, and it can be transferred and transplanted. And all the neural networks are about interpreting it to know what to do next. That's just that's a wild speculation.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, it looks like a processor, and people have used neural networks in artificial intelligence to do processing type things, and the things that artificial neural networks do are processing based. They're not necessarily memory based. You have a hard disk somewhere with the memories, and you have the processor that accesses them. And so we don't really know where this hard disk lies, but it's not necessarily in the brain based on these experiments. It's maybe
Yeah.
some sort of distributed chemical system in the body.
It may well be, and again, it's unclear how much of this transfers. Rather, so I made a kind of a Freudian slip there because of the next thing I was going to talk about. How much of this transfers from planaria? And people have done transplants in salamander. So there's a guy named Paul Peach at Indiana who transplanted memories between goldfish and salamanders, and did a lot of. If you ever come across it, there's a cool book called Shuffle Brain by Peach, and it's all about his experiments on shuffling the brains of various aquatic creatures. It's very good. But there's also been, and I have no idea how seriously to take any of this, because there haven't been real sort of rigorous studies on it. But I've spoken to a lot of folks who work in organ transplants. And there is some data starting to come out especially from heart and lung transplants, that there are interesting, what look like reasonably specific transfers of information from donor to recipient, from lung. So personality changes. We're talking wild stuff like, changes in political orientation, changes in sexual preference, like food. Vegetarians going meat eater, that kind of stuff. There'll have to be a lot more studies before we know how seriously to take this, but it's something that is widely sort of talked about in the transplant community. So at some point we might find out. At some point we might find out that it's human relevant. I don't know. I'm not making that claim. I certainly haven't done any of the work. But I think there's enough there that somebody should be doing rat experiments with transplants, and to figure out if there's something to that. But I would not be shocked at all if that turns out to be real. I think that's completely plausible based on what we've seen in planaria and other creatures.
And is
But the
there
jury's
any reasonable hypotheses to explain why this could happen?
Not really. No, honestly, no. There's not
Wow.
other than the general idea that the memory medium is not really what we think it is, and maybe broadly distributed through tissue in some way. But no, this is just at this point it's complete. It's total guesswork as far as what if that's real. What the mechanism is not known.
Oh wow, that's great. I love mysteries.
Yeah.
So, what from your research have you found that you find really surprising? I mean, these are very surprising results to me. Just to learn some of these, that transplants of memories might be possible, and this is a serious idea that has experimental support.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that surprises you or that you find very intriguing that you'd like to share?
Well, let's see. I mean, there are many things that are very intriguing. I see surprising things on a daily basis in our work and in other people's work. I mean, I think one of the things that is really intriguing is how much new science and new experiments you can do if you're willing to look for new symmetries. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we accept that provisionally that all the tricks of the brain and what happens during kind of typical cognition are really evolutionary modifications of much earlier bioelectric kinds of events that cells were using before to navigate morphospace, and then it sort of got pivoted into navigating three-dimensional space. Then one can read almost any paper in neuroscience as a developmental biology paper. What you do is, and we've done this experiment with my students, where you take a neuroscience paper and you put it through Microsoft Word and you do a find replace. And anywhere it says neuron, you replace that with cell. Anywhere it says millisecond, you say minute or hour, and then you just read it as a developmental biology kind of paper. And it's amazing how many of those concepts have obvious testable predictions that we are checking and that other people should be checking. So all the kinds of neuroscience is incredibly rich, and I don't think it's about neurons. I think all of the things that we see in neurons, from dissociative identity disorder to various kinds of psychiatric problems to various aspects of perceptual bistability, all this kind of stuff that you get from cognitive neuroscience and these kinds of things, they all have somatic analogs. They all have analogs that work in other contexts, including cellular kinds of things and maybe subcellular too, and actually maybe even supercellular. That people have shown that ant colonies fall for the same visual illusions that humans do. Not the individual ants, the colonies. So you can lay out food sources in a particular pattern, and you will see that the way that the colony sends out ants to sort of collect and come back and whatever, they make exactly the same mistakes as human perceptual systems make when in the light of these illusions. So it's like not the individual ants, but the group cognition of the colony is subject to some of the same limitations,
Processing mistakes.
Yes, that's exactly right. Exactly the same processing mistakes as humans. Super interesting. And of course that happens on a cellular level as well, maybe on a group level. So that to me is one of the most profound things that I find intriguing, is the scale and variance of a lot of these things, and how you can find some of the same, you can find some of the same phenomena at multiple scales. I think is incredibly interesting.
You're very empirical in your approach, as you've said, and you don't consider the hard problem of consciousness much in this research, and that comes through in your description of these things. So I think there are various schools of thought about the so-called hard problem of consciousness, and some people say, well, artificial intelligence will never be conscious because blah blah blah. But if you look at it on the mechanistic scale of small steps, there, as you say, when does the soul suddenly appear.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Is you're left with these sort of medieval, irresolvable questions about, what day is it that the soul shows up? They're unsolvable, and I think that and look, it's not that I don't worry about the problems of consciousness. I absolutely do. I just try to keep it very, very separate from all the other work because, well, for two reasons. One is because I think you can do all this other work without. I like divide and conquer, right? So if we can solve a bunch of stuff without having to solve the hard problem, that'd be great because we should solve things we can solve. So I try to keep it separate. I also try to keep it separate because just in terms of making impact, once you start talking about consciousness, some people write you off immediately because they don't want to get into it. Other people make it way overcomplicated with things that again make it hard to make progress. I just try to keep it separate, but there are some things we can say about this. A couple of things. First of all, this idea of such and such will never be conscious. With the exception of the few is sort of intellectually honest, but people who say, well, we are not conscious either. There's no such thing, right? There's a few people that say that, but the majority of the people who say, no, I'm a real human and I'm conscious and such will never be conscious. I have two things to say about that. One is the whole gradual developmental thing. Okay, you were definitely a cell at one point, so we can all talk about how you got to be conscious. But it was a nice, slow process. That's the first thing. That's really important. It was a gradual process. That's A. B. I really don't see why. I mean, where did we and our consciousness come from? Now that we don't have the Garden of Eden story anymore, you're left with just one thing, and that's evolution. So what you're really telling me is that this nearly blind sort of meandering hill climbing search that we call evolution, which is just as likely to increase intelligence as it is to decrease it. You're telling me that process is the only process that can give rise to conscious minds, and that no amount of engineering will ever duplicate whatever it is that this natural blind process is doing. I find that completely implausible. If somebody said to me, hey, what's more likely, if I didn't know any better, and somebody said to me, what's more likely to produce consciousness, a random search or some very smart scientists who, by the way, can also use random search if they want to, but they can also have, a rational design. I would say, well, of course, the second one. Well, why would you ever think that evolution has some sort of magic hold on being able to make conscious agents? So that seems completely implausible to me. So I don't see any reason to think that. We could talk about what the today's artifacts are doing, but to say that they can't seems crazy to me.
I think some of the objections that are maybe more believable would be the ones that are saying, you can't use a digital processor to do the same processes that the analog stuff in cells and bodies is doing, and that there need to be some sort of a field happening or an effect of fields. And I don't know how much credence to give that.
I don't know. I've heard about that. I think it's a hard claim to really defend, but also that in no way supports the idea of they will never be conscious, right? Because it could well be that tomorrow somebody says, oh yeah, I think you're right, and from now on I'm going to make my computers as analog computers with fields and whatever. Why not? Right? Who knows what the next architecture is going to be? It's fine to say that I agree that today's architectures are not likely to give us what we consider to be the full, sort of conscious experience. I agree with that, but I don't think we're that far from architectures that will, and I certainly don't think it's possible to say we will never do it. One other thing that I just want to point out, this idea of as I said, I kind of hate binary distinctions for almost anything. And so at one point I was sitting around thinking about, okay, what is the most like the strongest binary distinction that we couldn't turn into a continuum, right? Like what's really the most persistent binary thing? And the thing that came to my mind was, well, first person versus third person descriptions. So from the third person perspective, no, there's no hard problem of consciousness because they're all in the third person. It all boils down to behavior. I have no idea what, if any, consciousness you have. All I can do is make guesses based on your behavior. However, from the first person perspective, there absolutely is an interesting hard problem of consciousness because I know some things, not a lot, but I know some things about my own behavior. But I also have this first-person experience that is telling me that I don't have any science that predicts what that experience is going to be. That's a problem. So that's the hard problem of consciousness. So I have two things. So I have two things to say about that. One is that let's assume for the moment that in some number of years somebody has a correct theory of consciousness. Let's say somebody's got one. Okay. My question is very simple. Never mind what it actually does. I want to know what format do its predictions come in. We know from every other theory, we know what format the predictions come in. They're either numbers or they're shapes or there's something. What is the format of a prediction of a theory of consciousness? What does it give you? So if I tell you, hey, guess what? I've made a frogolotl. It's a 50% frog brain, 50% axolotl brain. I want your correct theory of consciousness tell me what it's like to be a frogolotl, right? What do you hand me with you? What comes out? It's not going to be numbers. That doesn't help. Is it going to be a poem? Is it going to be art? Like, what is it going to? I have no idea what it's going to be. And so this to me is the hard problem of consciousness, right? Not what is the details of the theory. I don't even know. And so I started thinking about that, and I started to think about this idea of breaking that binary divide, which seems pretty sharp. I mean, like Descartes said, it seems pretty pronounced. And I came up with this thought experiment, which is pretty doable even today. So let's think about this. So here I am. I'm studying somebody's brain. Let's say I'm studying your brain, and what I've got some electrodes in your brain. I'm collecting some data. They come through a computer. They're processed. I'm looking at them on the screen, and they're saying something about, we're doing some neural decoding, let's say, and so I can say something about what's going on in your mind right now, something about what memories you have or something. Now, at that point, that's a completely third-person perspective. I don't know what conscious experience goes along with any of what I'm seeing. What I see is things I could predict behavior on, but I don't really know anything about what it's like to be whatever it is that you are. So that's the first thing. Then I look at it and say, this computer in the middle is super clunky. Why am I using my retina to look at a screen to interpret electrical data that's coming out? To hell with that. Let's just do this. I'm gonna take the electrodes that are coming out of your brain, and I'm going to directly stick them into a relevant part of my brain so we can get this computer out of the way. And I'm going to feel the data the same way that I could feel, for example, if I wanted to, I could take data from the collider, right? The Large Hadron Collider. I could take that data and I could put it into a glove or an artificial retina. I could feel that data directly the way I see light photons, right? Why not? So at this point, I'm going to get rid of this computer and I'm just going to say, to heck with all this stuff. I'm just going to direct this. So now your brain and my brain are linked. Now, I think you can already see where this is going. To some extent, if we do the linkage correctly, I'm going to start to actually. I'm no longer quite at third person. I'm at like one and a half person perspective now. Because how do I normally know how I feel? Well, parts of my brain read other parts of my brain, right? How do I know what my state is? The pieces of the brain are communicating. Well, now you're in the same circuit. Why not? And then I say, this electrical interface is really clunky. It doesn't have the bandwidth of proper cellular connections. Here's what I'm going to do. We're just gonna physically attach our brains together. That's totally doable. If we were salamanders, you could literally take the two brains, stick them together. The cells would attach, and you would have one giant brain, and they would all talk to each other. Right now, what would happen after that? I don't know. But here's what happens after that. Once our brains are connected, whatever it is that my brain is doing when the two hemispheres talk to each other, because you might be tempted to say, so I've run this by people, and what people say is, oh, that's a crazy thing. We don't know what that connection is going to do to consciousness. I was, well, guess what? You already have that, because your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere have to talk to each other. And in fact, the front of your brain and the back of your brain have to talk to each other. So we've already know that pieces of brain talking to each other is what's responsible for consciousness. We already know that. So now, well, my brain is just bigger now. It's got four hemispheres now, but the basis of it is still exactly the same. But here's the thing. From that, what I don't find out is what it's like to be you. What I do find out is what it's like to be this new creature that's really me, you. That's what we find. That's what both of us find out. So I don't think it's
become a new self.
That's it. That's exactly right. We become a new self. And people say, "Oh, come on, that's crazy." But we know this happens all the time, because if we divide the two hemispheres, what do you get? You get basically two selves, because we know from the split brain studies the two halves have very different outlooks on things, right? These experiments where you do a split brain, you ask verbally, you say, "How do you like your job?" "Well, I'm an accountant and I like it fine." You let the opposite hand answer questions in writing, and it says, "Screw this, I hate this, I want to be a race car driver." And so we already know that exists. So if we can, at what point is there this fusion? And then the most interesting thing is all the work on dissociative disorders, right? What used to be called multiple personality disorder. So we already know the boundaries of these selves are flexible. They're flexible in the body of cells. They're flexible in the brain. So now we can smoothly. So now there's kind of a smooth continuum between this third person and first person. So even that, I think, is really a continuum, because we can construct all of these in-between cases, which are totally plausible, where you slowly go from being an external scientist who can say nothing about the cognition, the consciousness, and only cognition, to being, I am now part of this system. And I think it's probably not an accident that some ancient thinkers talked about this, and they talked about the difference between chemistry and alchemy, right? The difference is that, you can do chemistry as a third person kind of perspective and just sort of study what happens outside of you. To really do experiments on consciousness, you will not be the same afterwards. The only way to do experiments in consciousness is to change your consciousness in some way, right? And there's a million ways that people thought about doing that, right? So that's what I think, that's the difference. But again, it goes in gradations. So I do think it's an interesting problem, but it's not the same problem as just studying cognition.
Wow. Well, this has been a very enlightening discussion, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you. We're getting to the end of our time slot here, so thank you so much for coming on the show and discussing your research with us and your views on consciousness and cognition. Wow, a lot to think about from this. I'm gonna fire off a Rational View T-shirt to you for coming on the show.
Nice. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much. And I have one last question that I ask all of my guests, and I think I'd be very interested in your response. What science fiction interests you? What do you like reading?
Yeah, well, there's a lot. I've read quite a lot of mostly the older stuff. I think my favorite author is Stanislaw Lem. So he's a Polish writer that. He just plays with all this kind of stuff that we were talking about, all these unconventional boundaries and things that that's probably my favorite.
I like the science fiction that gives me new ideas. That's the thing I like so much about reading new fiction. So thank you again for coming on. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great conversation. Thank you.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.